Hello, my name is John Vance. I'm the press attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Prague, and I'm sitting here today with Kurt Volker, the U.S. Ambassador to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. And Ambassador Volker is in town right now at a conference. You might want to elaborate on a little bit and tell us what you're doing here. What's brought you to Prague, sir?
Well, thanks very much. This is the conference commemorating the 10th anniversary of Czech membership in NATO. And I played a role in NATO enlargement in the mid-90s. I worked at our embassy in Budapest and then was working in the U.S. Senate when we voted to ratify the membership of the Czech Republic in NATO. And I think when you look back on it now, you realize what a good decision it was. That you now have not only Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary, but also the Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia, and this year Albania and Croatia, all becoming members of NATO, all part of the European Union or on their way into that as well. 100 million people plus now living in democratic, more prosperous, and safe societies compared to where they were 20 years ago. It's been a tremendous success for the region, a tremendous success for Europe.
Mm-hmm. Well, you touched on the Czech Republic as a starting point, so let's stay with that. The Czechs have been very active in NATO, participating in numerous different projects. How would you assess thus far how they managed to integrate in those 10 short years?
Yeah, the Czech Republic is an extraordinary ally. It is contributing in substantial ways in the Balkans, in Afghanistan. It is part of what it means to be a member of NATO. It's not only being a consumer of security, where NATO is there to protect the security of a given ally. It's also being a contributor to security, so that as a country that's part of a community that shares democratic values and faces the same threats and challenges in the world, to do its part to contribute to dealing with those threats and challenges. And the Czech Republic has really stood up and done that.
Mm-hmm. And I know that they've had a very forward-leaning presence in Afghanistan. They have a PRT in Logar province. And Afghanistan has been considered by the incoming Obama administration as a major priority for NATO. Maybe you'd like to expand on that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. The Obama administration came in, and one of the first steps it took was to order a strategy review of Afghanistan. Because, to be perfectly honest, if you look at what's happening in Afghanistan today, none of us can be satisfied. The insurgency is able to conduct too many attacks, kill too many civilians, cause too many disruptions. We need to get a better handle on this. Part of that is a military challenge in order to provide greater public security and to buy time for a broader strategy to take effect. That's why President Obama ordered another 17,000 American troops to go in. But at the same time, we need a strategy that combines civil and military efforts, good governance, dealing with the narcotics trade, looking at Afghanistan and Pakistan as a whole because of that border area. And when you look at the civil military efforts, these PRTs that you mentioned, they're very important, and the Czech Republic has one in Logar. It's getting that mix of the civilian development, governance, reconstruction piece, and the military security piece linked up and done effectively that will help make a difference on the ground in Afghanistan. The Czech Republic has been one of the innovators in that effort.
Mm-hmm. And looking at expanding our focus a little bit, where do you see NATO going in a broader sense at this 60-year juncture?
Well, NATO has been a huge success historically, for all of its 60 years. First off, surviving and then winning the Cold War, and then this NATO enlargement, bringing more countries in, and then turning itself to deal with the modern-day security challenges, whether it's ethnic cleansing in the Balkans, or violent extremism and terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, or even getting into humanitarian relief, such as delivering aid to Pakistan after the earthquake. When you look at NATO in the future, I'd say there's the most important thing is to build a strong sense of transatlantic unity, that we are a community of democratic nations that need to deal with challenges in the world together. That's the heart of it. Then, when you look at the specific challenges, I would name 4. There's Afghanistan, which we've talked about. There's building a new consensus on how we deal with the complex set of issues in Europe's east, whether it's our relationship with Russia, or concern about Russian behavior, or support for Georgia and Ukraine, or the importance of Article 5 as being at the heart of NATO, a collective defense commitment at the heart of NATO. Not forgetting about the Balkans. We've done a lot to stabilize the Balkans, but they need to be part of mainstream Europe. And then looking at new kinds of security threats, energy security in particular is critically important. Cyber attacks, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, failed states. And these are the areas where our security is most likely to be threatened in the future, and areas that NATO needs to pick up and figure out how to address for the long term.
And that's something that's already well in the works as NATO continues to expand its mandate.
It's begun already. It's certainly begun already. And I think when you look at what NATO has done over the last 10 years, an example I like to take is in the 90s, before 1995, NATO had 16 members, had no partners, and had never conducted a military operation. Done defense planning, exercises, none of the rest. Today, where are we, 2009, we're going to have 28 members of NATO once Albania and Croatia join. We have partners in Central Asia, the Caucasus, the Middle East, Maghreb, Persian Gulf, Australia, Japan. We've conducted operations in the Balkans, in Afghanistan, training mission in Iraq, airlifting African Union troops to Darfur, counterterrorism, naval operations in the Mediterranean, counter-piracy operations off Somalia. So we have enlarged NATO, we have built partnerships, we have begun to address security challenges far away from NATO because we know that ultimately they will affect our security as well, so we better start now. This is a trend that's been going on for over a decade. It has to be consolidated, understood, brought to our publics, and made part of the way that NATO deals with security challenges in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned that there are manifold threats that are facing us now, so let's touch briefly upon one that's of particular interest in the Czech Republic. The United States over the past several years has pursued a policy attempting to locate some missile defense elements in Poland and the Czech Republic. Talk a little bit about how that fits into the overall NATO defense picture throughout Europe in a wider sense.
Right. Well, the starting point of this is that you see a country like Iran developing long-range missiles, already possessing short and medium-range missiles, with an active nuclear enrichment program that can lead to a nuclear weapon. And you see that country also supporting terrorist groups and violence in its own region, such as Hamas or Hezbollah. So this adds up to being a serious concern for the United States, for Europe, for a wider democratic community. One aspect of dealing with that threat is to be able to protect territories and populations from the possibility of an Iranian missile attack. The worst thing you would want to see is an Iranian missile, whether it's conventional or armed with some other kind of warhead, landing on a European city. That would be a humanitarian catastrophe. Looking at how to defend or prevent that sort of thing is important in its own right. It also then contributes to deterring such an attack, because if it won't be effective, why do it? And frankly, what we're really interested in is reducing the Iranian threat. How do we eliminate that? This was Secretary Clinton was talking about when she was recently in Brussels and then in some interviews in Washington. How do we eliminate the Iranian threat? And frankly, if we do, then the need to proceed with missile defense changes in terms of timing and scope, because we're not dealing with the same threat. We don't see any evidence of that right now. We see Iran going full steam ahead. And frankly, that's why it's important that we continue to proceed in a measured way, as the administration has stated, with missile defense, because it's clear that we will then be developing the countermeasures that would make any potential Iranian threat irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. So in a certain sense, Iran lends a sense of urgency in its actions in terms of nuclear fissile material, in terms of missile development. But there are other threats that are also concerned, and thus it behooves us to proceed.
That's also true. I guess one thing that people talk about a lot is the role of Russia. And we have to recognize that the fact of proceeding with missile defense is something Russia has objected to, and therefore it's an issue that we have to manage. But that is different and has to be separated conceptually from how to deal with an Iranian threat that's developing. So yes, we want to have a good relationship with Russia. Yes, we'd like to work together with Russia on missile defenses. But how we proceed on that project is going to be driven by how we perceive the emerging Iranian threats.
Mm-hmm. And the U.S. government has certainly shown a new willingness to engage, to in some measure, reset, I believe is the term that's so often used, both with Russia and to engage possibly in a wider dialogue.
The proverbial reset button, which we said we would do. On that, I would say that what has happened in recent years is the frictions in U.S.-Russia relations and NATO-Russia relations had grown, and the administration wanted to, in a sense, hit the reset button to say, look, we shouldn't be so agitated. We have areas of common interest with Russia. We want to work together with Russia where we can. We should have a dialogue with Russia. And we'll do that with our eyes open. We know there are areas where we have fundamental disagreements with Russia. Fundamentally disagree over their decision to recognize Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states. Disagree with the continued large military presence of Russian forces there and the announcement that they're going to create a new military base. Disagree with Russia's suspension of the CFE treaty. So we've got to be frank about these things and talk about them, but talk about them with Russia. At the same time, we have to be very clear that NATO stands for collective defense among its members, and we're committed to that. Very clear that we support reformers in Europe who are trying to build democratic market economies and live in safety and security, whether it's Central Europe, which has done this and is now part of NATO, or whether it's Ukrainians and Georgians who have a long way to go but want to be part of the same family.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for that tour of where NATO is right now. We know you're very busy, so we thank you for coming by and sparing us some time, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Best of luck to you.